Greetings and welcome to our next GatherVerse Summit 2024 roundtable discussion on a very intimate but yet very important discussion at the intersection of planet and technology. When we think about planet, we think about Terra Symbiosis, if you will, the relationship of this planet, this Earth, that we all live on, this great, big, beautiful planet that we share, that we all have a little bit of time on to be able to spend with, and that we've ultimately, in many ways, we've inherited, and there have been populations of people that have inherited in times past before us, and each person did something different with it, with the time that they had. And so here's our time in this February 20th, if you will, 2024, to be able to have a very open and candid discussion and an important and endearing discussion on what are the next steps that we can take with the present day tools and utility of technology, audience, to develop a better approach to planetary betterment. We've assembled a roundtable of experts, explorers, and doers here with us today for this discussion. And I'd like for each of you to be able to share with the audience who you are and what you're doing at this intersection of planetary betterment, and then we will proceed into this great journey of a discussion. And we'll begin with you, Andrea Camargo, please.
Thank you, Christopher. Hey, Deborah. Hey, Andrea. Good to see you. My career started as a veterinarian here in Colombia. This love I have for animals and nature was always there for me. So it was very obvious when I decided to study and become a doctor of animals. Throughout my career, I discovered a few things of us humans, that we are causing our planet to be disturbed in some ways. And veterinarians have a lot to do with that. We have very intensive practices sometimes. And that made me shift my diet, my lifestyle, and even my career. Because when I was finishing my studies, I realized, if I want to really change some things in our society, it's really important that I learn how society works and how the economic system is involved and ingrained in it. So I went to Holt University. I studied there international business and another master on entrepreneurship and innovation. And then I traveled a bit around Europe, learning about regenerative agriculture. Then I came back to Colombia and created our company with Daniel, my partner, called Refi Collective, where we consult companies going through this transition from extractive to regenerative, and we support all this process. And very happy to be here. Thank you.
We're very happy to have you. Thank you, Andrea. Dr. Deborah Thompson, if you could share with us so much of what you're doing, which is extraordinary. We were certainly happy to have you back with us to gather.
Thank you so much, Christopher, and thanks to all the organizers here. It's really a pleasure to be back. So I'm a veterinarian, just like Andrea, but I have long ago, back in the day when I was in veterinary school, I heard about something called One Health. And once I heard about that, it changed my life. So what One Health is just put simply that connection between our health and the health of the environment, animals and plants, all living things. Because ultimately our actions on the environment play a role in our family's health and our health, etc. And so with the One Health approach, we work together to solve these mighty big problems that affect all life on the planet. So when I heard about this in veterinary school, I thought, this is my calling. And before veterinary school, I was teaching. So now I combine my two passions, One Health and education. And so with One Health Lessons, this nonprofit organization, we go into communities and we teach children and adults about One Health in order to change some simple behaviors, in order to protect communities and protect all the living beings within that community. So thanks so much for the opportunity, Christopher.
It's powerful, Dr. Thompson, and thank you for sharing that. We look forward to hearing more as we continue this excursion. But first, we introduce Andrea Silva, who we're so happy to be able to convene with again. Andrea, please share with us who you are and the extraordinary work that you're doing.
Hi, everyone. It's nice to be here with you. My name is Andrea. I'm from Peru. I originally studied architecture, urbanism, and art, and then started focusing on more of the communal architecture through urbanism. Went through more of like a geographics, anthropologic aspects for investment projects and territorial planning. And that's kind of in the same time that I started connecting also with indigenous communities and elders from the Mapuche and Andean traditions. And I think that that was basically what made me shift. Like there's levels of what you like. Like I love design and I love, like urbanism and all these things. But when I started hearing the way indigenous communities see the world, it really was the only thing that actually made sense in how the world works, and like solving all these existential questions that I had, or like giving some type of guidance there. And it wasn't only in that aspect, but I see it very much as like a fractal mentality, where you can really like, it's really necessary for us to start connecting with communities so we can be in the forefront of innovation and like environmental impact too. So then, yeah, I also studied an MBA in entrepreneurship and innovation to try to figure out how to do it from like the terms of, like doing an entrepreneurship and finding funding and stuff like that. And what I noticed was that basically in both sides, you would always have dependencies. Like through the nonprofits, you would have like to kind of rely on existentialism in a way, and like depend on someone to fund the project, and the community wouldn't have the full autonomy. And through a social entrepreneurship, if you get a funding from, an angel investor or something like that, at the end, the percentage of that funding and voting rights goes to the person that invested, but not to a community of things that have to do with their community. So when 2 years ago I opened up an art gallery in Miami in the intersection of for Art Basel, in the intersection of global impact and environmental impact and NFTs, and that's where I started seeing the structures of blockchain. And that's where it was like, okay, this I think is a very important structure to have, so that actually marginalized communities could have autonomy. And so integrating things that have been studied in the past, Nodo DAO was created, and Nodo, it means intersection, node. And basically it's like the idea is to be a bridge of bridges. While the more density and diversity that you have, the more innovation that you can have in a space, the more different minds can get together in like equality, you can actually have new ideas. And it's basically gathering together creators, change makers, and indigenous communities to be able to forge not only financial, but more than anything cultural, like cultural preservation and impact within rural cooperatives through the intersection of blockchain, art, and culture. So yeah, I'm happy to be here.
Take care, Andrea. We certainly welcome and greet your presence, and we look forward to hearing more as we share in this little bit of time that we all have together. But I want to set the stage and the tone here, because we talk about planetary development and betterment. As we know that Dr. Thompson, she works with animals. Andrea, I know that Camargo, that you've been so steadfast in with the consideration of humane treatment for animals. And someone may ask, well, why are we having this discussion at GatherVerse at the intersection of humanity and technology? What do animals have anything to do with it? It has almost everything to do with it, because we live in a biodiverse ecosystem that we live in this planet. And when we think about the innovations of this world, such as generative AI, and we think about the metaverse, and as Andrea Silva just brought up, a blockchain technology, it seems so prudent, and it seems to me that we must begin, and many have, but many more we would hope will, and especially our GatherVerse community that's with us today do, that we start thinking about innovation when we talk about human betterment, when we talk about social and sustainable impact. What we mean in part is, one, a lot of that begins with planetary development. how do we take these tools and resources to take so much of what's been neglected around us and what we haven't afforded to be able to utilize and take advantage of, and to help make this planet more inhabitable, better, if you will, to alleviate some of the damage that we've done to this planet, known and unknown. Because new scientific research and papers come out to let us know, hey, those things that you deployed out here to the world, they've actually had very bad effects to animals. They've had very bad effects to the environment. They've had very bad effects to to Earth as a whole. And so, how do we take now these incredible and extraordinary tools that we have, and say, well, how the heck can ChatGPT help me to be able to better the planet? But that's not what we're getting at. What we're saying is how do we take these tools, Andrea, to be able to enhance our mindset, to be able to assist us in thinking differently, so that it can equip us with better information to develop and build tools that can make this planet better. And so I'm bringing this first question to you, Andrea, when it comes to the promising technologies for restoring ecological balance and how they can be scaled, because I know that you're a stalwart in working with biomimicry. And I know that you're working with technologies that's such an incredible and one of the most fascinating things I've ever heard of in technology, at this intersection of biodevelopment and taking advantage and looking at how we can look at the planet to be able to help scale a technology itself, and to some degree vice versa. It's very extraordinary and fascinating, but I'd like for you to share with the audience more of what you're doing, not just with Refi, but how you're looking at this and how this came to be.
Sure. Let me start with this, let's say, iceberg model. And so we have in the top of our minds what happens in the event, like, and the news, in the events we see in our daily life, like wildfires and climate change and economic disruptions and new technologies. But this is only the tip of the iceberg. And so if you go down and look and really understand the mental models of how we understand reality, how we understand society, and how we care about each other and the planet, then you see this transition from a really egocentric paradigm towards a more ecological paradigm, where the human is not on the top and all the rest of the animals are below the human. But you can start to see how people relate to nature and they become part of nature. This is the ecological paradigm. But when we talk about regeneration, biomimicry, and all these new perspectives, then we change this eco paradigm to a seva paradigm. And seva means, it's a word in Sanskrit, meaning being at service. And when you start seeing nature as an ally who you are willing to give your service to, then it really shifts your mindset and it shifts how you interact with it. You start looking at it like if it was your mentor. And this is how I personally approach my biomimicry, by looking at the interactions between a flower and a bee and a tree and the roots and the mycelium. If you look, for example, at the mycelium network that goes underground, you can see that it has a way of communicating between different plants, microorganisms, different beings, and it's basically like a web, an internet web that interconnects different organisms. And this is nature's way of exchanging information and communicating. And it's really beautiful to see this symbiotic relationship between the microorganisms, the roots, the plants, the pollinators, and the humans also, and be able to create new business models based on this reciprocity.
Thank you for sharing. And I find that just extraordinary Let me do a quick follow-up with that and ask you, do you get the sense that much of what we innovate and see and have innovated today has in some way taken its dictates from how we've seen the planet and the way that it grows and the way that it flourishes season to season? Do we get a lot of our inspiration from planetary growth?
I think so, yeah. I mean, all these new technologies, they resemble how our own body works, I think. One of the interesting perspectives that I've been reading on lately is growth. You mentioned growth as something good. I mean, nature creates this prosperity of growth. But sometimes we have this mismatch in our minds, looking growth as if it were GDP growth. And so you see it like an exponential curve and just goes up, similar to innovation. But actually, this endless growth is limited to a finite planet. And this is something that really kind of changed the way we look at economy. And this is how we start integrating bioeconomy into the conversation, because it's not only about technology advancement and population growth and GDP growth. What other indications are available for us to measure our success, not only in growing, maybe we can be agnostic to growth, but really keeping that values we have as humans and care about each other. How can we measure biodiversity? How can we measure how life is flourishing in these different projects that there have been creating? For example, Andrea, I know you have examples of amazing projects related to how indigenous cultures are taking care of different lands to protect it and to honor it. It will be really interesting to know that.
Thank you for sharing that, Andrea. It's interesting, audience, as we sit here and listen to these expressions, and we're coming to Dr. Thompson. I sit here and think about, with what we see, especially with what's been discussed so far, walk with me, if you will, that when we talk about AI and we talk about the disruptive nature of AI, and we know that good technology is superseded by better technology, and better technology is superseded by even greater technology, and it's what we commonly refer to as the disrupt. Okay, cool. We got that. So by way of this disruption, we are seeing some job loss. We're seeing, and that's not the only arbiter, if you will, of job loss, but it is substantial and significant when we think about the impact of AI already and what we see these new models coming with. And I'm getting somewhere with this. Some people that are being laid off are being laid off from jobs that were considered premium. They don't have a plan B, if you will. As I sit here under the sound of the voice of you three, it seems to me that I can imagine someone who was a developer yesterday, that she or he tomorrow will be a planetarian developer, that they will have a new responsibility in saying, listen, the ecosystem of commerce and enterprise globally that we've entered into from college or from school, this world of work and the workforce that we've entered into is no longer existent the way that we thought it would be. And the reality is, what is left? We have to realize that the innovation that we innovate, it has a ceiling, it has a cap. And all the people that have these jobs that were relevant, now that we have these models that can, in robotic infrastructure that's soon to arrive, that can take over these things, it seems to me that someone says, well, what's left for us to do? And as I'm listening to what you all are sharing, it seems to me that there's a lot that could be done when it comes to developing and helping sustain this planet. with that said, Dr. Thompson, the work that you're doing with One Health Lessons, the work that you're doing when it comes to animals, when it comes to nature.
Thanks, Chris. You hit on so many good points there. And I truly appreciate that the world is changing every day, right? And so the only way to, survive is to adapt. And that's what nature does too.
Right.
You know, you asked about mimicry and such, and if it's a good idea to mimic nature. Well, nature actually has been working quite well for quite some time. So it behooves us to emulate nature as much as possible in that regard. Now, you also mentioned, people are losing jobs and things like that. And what's important from an individual's perspective is to realize what transferable skills do you have as an engineer, as an entrepreneur, whatever your story is. What are your transferable skills? I encourage you all to write down what are the skills that you have, even if you think, well, I got the skill like 20 years ago, it's not really applicable. It very well could be. Because when it comes to the One Health approach, which again means that we have people from all different backgrounds coming together towards protecting the planet, humans, animals, all at the same time, well, then think about how your skills can be of use and approach people outside of your niche, outside of your own profession, and see where the conversation leads. I read an incredible book called Breaking Through by Katalin Kariko. She just won the Nobel Prize in medicine. And she talked about potential. And potential is nothing until you try to apply your potential. Nobody's going to miss what you don't do or what you haven't done. They'll recognize the importance once you actually do it. And so with that, if you don't mind, Chris, I have 3 examples of where innovation has changed the world. And I think that your audience might take it a step further with their background knowledge in engineering and AI and such, if you don't mind me mentioning these 3 things. Okay. You had mentioned earlier, Christopher, that, why would animals be important, for instance? Well, when you change, I'm talking about any species, I'm talking about any plant, okay? Whenever you change within a habitat, the population of a particular species, well, then things have to rebalance, right? And so when we're talking about wild horses in the western part of the United States, for instance, the same problem happens in Australia, for instance, and other countries. But wild horses, at least in the western part of the United States, are overpopulated by tens of thousands. Therefore, they are destroying their environment. They don't mean to, they're just trying to survive. They're trying to forage, they're trying to get their grass and such. But at the same time, it's eroding the land below them. And then they end up in people's driveways because they're overpopulated. Fine. Traditionally, through policy, the thought was, okay, well, we'll shoot them with a little dart to try to use progesterone and estrogen and try to minimize their reproductive status. We don't kill them, right, in the United States, but we try to minimize their reproductive capabilities. But that is only good for a few years. And then all of a sudden, somebody thought, why don't you put intrauterine devices in these animals? That lasts so much longer. And so what the example is taking a learned knowledge from another species and applying it in this species in order to protect the environment and to order to protect communities where these horses were roaming in the front yards and such. Another example, I know Andrea Silva, I think you said that you were an architect. So this blows my mind. It's called Warka Water, WARKA Water. Warka Water Tower. What that does, an engineer and an architect, I believe, ended up building this tower to capture dewdrops in areas of the world where there's minimal water. How brilliant is that? Not only will that help the community, the human beings, it'll help the plants, it'll help the animals, it'll help all life. Last but not least, think about cars, actually. 20 years ago, I thought, well, if I was going to be an engineer, maybe I'd go this route. But I'm happy to say some people have been starting to think about this. Everybody likes their cars, right? I'd say across the planet, cars are a standard. But what if cars can act like trees, sucking in CO2, expelling oxygen, living off of solar and water? Doesn't matter if it's dirty or not. But what I'm talking about here is, how can you, with your backgrounds, all of the listeners back here, apply your knowledge to further these 3 examples in order to benefit more communities at large? It's like planting more trees, but if you don't have more space for trees, why don't we kind of recycle that idea into something like cars? So thanks for listening and hearing me out.
But Dr. Thompson, permit me to do a follow-up, and thank you for sharing those 3 extraordinary examples. How do we enter that? How does the listener that's listening today, that's inspired by what's being said today, how do they enter into this way of thinking, not just psychologically, but to this thinking that leads to action, sustainable action? What are some of the steps that they can take sooner rather than later to go about this? Or do they have to go get a 4 or 5 year degree based on a university that they can't afford?
No. I would not go that route. That is expensive and that is time consuming. I would first do something like informational interviews, which means contact somebody, cold call somebody on LinkedIn, message somebody and say, you're doing something that I think is important. I would love to hear your story. I'd love to share my story. Let's introduce ourselves. And then from there, you can brainstorm. But ultimately, these types of projects have to come from relationships. And it's pointless to get a whole second degree if you know somebody who already has that second degree and you just work together in order to better the community and the planet.
Thank you for sharing that. There's more that we can say on that. Andrea Silva, we're coming to you now. We think about how can traditional knowledge be integrated with modern science to address environmental challenges. You're working on very cutting edge technology, such as blockchain technology, and what we're looking at in the Web3 atmosphere and the ecosystem. I want to bring this to you in the sense that with the work that you're doing, with how we're addressing climate impact, how we're addressing Earth sustainability, and we see this intersection of AI that's just here, and we see this growth. And we see an opportunity for brand messaging, for deployment of models to be able to learn and to address. Does it seem appropriate that we start thinking about climate GPT, that we start thinking about planet GPT, deploying a database of information? Because I believe that some of the best information is going to come from human intelligentsia. Where else will it come from? But it needs to come from a specific set of human beings that are actually doing on the ground work and that have been doing this, that have tried and tested methodologies and approaches to it. So with that said, a little bit a different approach to this question beyond what's on screen is, what are you contributing to climate GPT? What are you telling that it's most necessary? What should it be focused on when it comes to this intersection of planetary betterment, Andrea?
Wow. Okay. Thanks for those questions. So first of all, I think that it's a perspective shift, because the Earth regenerates. The Earth is always in movement. The Earth has always known how to regenerate from complete chaoses that might have happened. The thing is that I think that most of the issue with the environmental factor is social. Is that the right people are not in the right seat at the table. The people that have been learning how to actually connect to nature, how to actually learn from it, how to actually talk to it, how to actually see, the geometries behind it, and from that create art, create different mechanisms, and tools, and for generations have been taught what happens not only in nature in general, because that's the thing, we have a very generalistic kind of definition of what nature is, right? Nature is we've been taught in a way that this is nature and this is humanity, and we're somehow in a way separate to nature when we are part of an intricate system. And it's like each community is connected locally to the biodiverse system that's there. So like the plants that are only there and the things that are specifically in that location. For example, in Cusco, in the mountains, at the top of the mountains, where it's like 5,000 meters high, 16,400, you find these flowering leaves that are like cotton, and they look like lungs because specifically people there suffer from things like when they get sick. If they get sick of things that have to do with lungs, and so the plants already have the medicine there for that situation that happens in that location. But maybe in another location, obviously, the people that are, you know, in a community, an indigenous community, maybe next to the sea, don't know what that plant is, and they don't have to because they are connected to their location and they know what that location is. And so we have to start seeing nature as like a very diverse thing that like is locally, like we need to start seeing it as like what is around me, you know, also like what are the plants that grow around me, what's happening there. When you were saying about, you know, environmental GPT and things like that, well, there's a lot of factors to take into account there, because there's indigenous cultures that have been learning for generations that we are part of an intricate system, and it comes back to like the way that we've learned since we were born. Basically, is a very linear system. We've basically went to study one career, and we see things separately or black and white in this society. And the way things are seen in indigenous cultures are fractals. It's everything is interconnected and dynamically moving, always, constantly, consistently, which is what nature is. So it's not establishing a system that is a static system. Most of the things that are happening in the world, the ways that we see communities are organizations that are static. How do we start seeing things as organisms? How do we start really thinking of things in that way, you know? And so in that aspect, yes, it is important that the people that are connected to the space and have access to that information can put that in somewhere. But the thing is that this information needs to also be like it has to be autonomous to the people that are in the land that have had it for generations, because that hasn't happened up until now. And in order for that to happen, there's communities that, you know, maybe maximum have like one of those old Nokia phones that had the snake game or something like that. Or, you know, just now maybe some communities that we're working with got solar panels, but before they didn't, and they don't have signal or internet. And maybe someone that comes in with like the phone needs to get out of the town. They need to actually walk out of the mountain, walk out of the jungle to have a call with you and things like that. And so we're talking about this type of technology. And so when we did these events with NOAA, when we were bringing together indigenous communities and people that are like in the forefront of tech innovation, people that are, you know, deans of their universities, artists, like very diverse groups of people according to the locations that are there, we started speaking about blockchain. We started speaking about, you know, AI in terms first of all in their language, in like Quechua, in the Shipibo language, which that's also a whole other thing to take into account, because 96% of the world's languages are indigenous, and 90% of those could be lost in 100 years. And language holds culture. Like we have, it's not only the words are one of the most important things that we can do as human beings. The way we communicate and how we understand the culture has to do with how our language is, you know, kind of shapes it, you know. So if we lose these languages, we're not only losing the languages, we're losing the relation to the nature that's there, the environment that's there. So we start seeing things more, how Andrea was saying, as like a bigger mechanism where all these things are interrelated. Language is interrelated with environment, you know, like the way that we're connecting with cultures is interrelated with environment. All these things are part of the same thing. So it's important to start combining them. Like we've been taught to go into a linear path. Like I studied architecture, that's what I did my whole life, or whatever. Right. And all my friends are architects and this and that, and I stay in kind of that like island of the field. But if we start bringing together people that are different and that have had different experiences and have expertise in different situations, then things start happening. Like, for example, I can know a lot about how to grow a seed in the mountains of Peru and the cycles that go through the way that seed grows. But an engineer can start seeing that seed in like terms of actually developing mechanisms, or an architect can start seeing it as structures for buildings, and an artist can start seeing it, So we need to start creating these pathways that we've always had as human beings that have been dormant for the way that we've been taught. So that is, one of the things that indigenous knowledge can be integrated with modern science. It's a long process. One of the things is that technology is a very exponential, sometimes even fast-paced, like when I opened our gallery, everything was happening like it's like one day was 10 days. It's just like things, you have to move things really fast, and we have to adapt. Like we don't have to adapt to technology, but technology has to adapt to the cultures that we're trying to work with. Because if we don't have that at the forefront, the culture and the way that thinks, we don't have the base to actually start building. And we're going to start building from these belief systems that are in our mind versus how things have been taught, for generations. We've lost that in our society. So yeah, I think those are some of the ways that we can integrate traditional knowledge. And I wanted also to give 3 examples of things that are happening, just like Andrea was speaking. For example, in July of this year, I went to visit a friend that's in the Amazon jungle, like Iquitos, an hour away by boat, very isolated. They don't have electricity, so they don't have a fridge. So basically, I was eating like the food that was there with the fruits and maybe tuna if I wanted something like a can, or I don't know, things like that for days. But what's happening there is really interesting, because the community that's there that have known the nature that's there for a while, they're starting to create low-tech innovation systems where you can start seeing and seeing the way that the seed grows, for example. So they start seeing the way that these different plants are growing and mapping out all of the stages of the seed. So like when the seed comes in, how many seeds actually sprout, all these seeds do, and all the little steps of the process, and then integrate AI into like generative predictions on how that could work, and start using that and like talking to all the neighboring Amazon communities into how that could start working also. So that's one. The second one, actually, Deborah, when I was like, I don't know, at least 10 years ago, when I was working with slums in Peru, because I started 14 years ago working with communities specifically in the slums, and then 11 years ago with indigenous. I worked with this guy called Abel Cruz. He's the one that invented the Atrapanieblas. That's kind of the technology that company that you're saying works. And he invented it in these slums in Peru, where it's crazy because the slums are like out of Lima, maybe 80% of Lima is slums, and people don't see it. And all of that 80% of Lima has to pay more for water than the people that are in the cities that earn like most of the income of the country, maybe. And because there's no access to actually like a water sanitation system, so a truck has to go and take the water all the way there, and that costs more. And so what this guy did in most of these slums, especially in Manzanilla, where this happened, there's a lot of fog. So he just started cutting plastic bags and like putting them in nets, and they would collect 60 liters of water every day naturally because of the fog. So that's amazing. But going back to indigenous things, for example, there's some communities in the only in high altitudes, there's this mulch that grows. This company called Incamos, basically uses, like, most of the commercial producing of that moss goes to orchids in, like, China or those areas. But it's been studied and seen that that moss has properties of actually being able to collect and purify water. That's important in spaces where maybe there's droughts, just like in the mountains. And that plant grows there. So going back to what I was saying before, no? And these things, like, are knowledge from these communities that can be in, if there's an engineer in the group and stuff like that, then we can start thinking, okay, like, how do we take this material and start putting it into a scaling system where this can happen in places where there's, like, historically been issues with water, for example, right? And then the third one, which is a project we're working with in Nodo, is like blockchain for supply chain management is huge, because most of the times it's when, like, marginalized communities sell whatever they sell or have some type of knowledge, they don't know what happens after it. And then what happens is that ponchos are being sold for $5,000 in the US, and the women that made all the work that takes a month to do minimum, they get paid maximum $100, $150, and they don't know what happened to the thing. But in the Instagram, there's a picture of the women being happy, look at the impact that we have, and look at how we're working with these people. But like how is there really traceability for this? Is there really transparency? We can use blockchain for that. So these are the ways that we've been starting to communicate the importance of technology in marginalized communities, and why also not only is it important for indigenous communities, like, we have a lot to like, I honestly see it as, like, we as a society, like, the nonprofit would be more for us, because we need to learn so much from that. But also, like, how does this technology help, in the autonomy, and more than anything, the cultural preservation, which also goes hand in hand with environmental preservation for communities.
Andrea, thank you for sharing that. There's so much that you said there. You had me at indigenous cultural way of thinking. I think that's just so powerful, as opposed to being so vertical, specific focus on our upbringing of what we focus on under the banner of education, if you will. But to start thinking more indigenous, might we take a note from you to say, have we learned everything that we could learn from our indigenous cultural inhabitants of the planet Earth as well? Have we? The answer is no. With the few minutes that we have left remaining, Andrea and Dr. Thompson, the question's on the screen. Audience, we see it. What are the biggest obstacles to achieving a sustainable balance with our planet? We want to do these things. We're equipped. We're educated to do these things. We're learning as we go. But there's real obstacles in order to achieve this. What is that, Andrea?
Well, we have big challenges, of course, and we sometimes think that these challenges are so much bigger than us that we cannot do anything. But let me tell you a few examples of how we are able to help as individuals. For example, when I was studying veterinary medicine, we learned that 70% of all infectious diseases are zoonotic. So it means that these diseases, being a bacteria or a virus, they transmit through animals, and they come or go in and out, animals, humans, and we all share different diseases. And on the other hand, veterinarians, we use 80% of antibiotics worldwide. This because we produce animals in a way that it's really difficult not to use antibiotics, because they are all together, where it's really easy to transmit different diseases. So why am I giving this data? Because our relationship to food is extremely important when we are tackling these environmental problems. I think it's around 100 to 1 the energy we have to spend when we are consuming 1 kilogram of beef, for example. And so we as individuals have the power to change our diets. and to explore plant-based alternatives, because they are much more, they have less infectious diseases, plants. They require less energy to be produced. And with regenerative agriculture, we can even start to capture and sequester carbon from the atmosphere down to the ground through the roots of the plants. So more than 60% of carbon, it's below the ground. The other 40% are the trees that we see above the ground. And so there are many things that we can do through this supply chain. And I invite you all to start thinking of what was nature's energy spending when I'm consuming either food or clothing or technology. Everything has an impact, and we can start producing huge changes through our daily habits.
Thank you, Andrea. Thank you so much for sharing that. Dr. Thompson, close us out. What are the biggest obstacles to achieving a sustainable balance with our planet?
Thanks, Christopher. I know it might sound too simple, but trust me, it is not. Because if you whittle everything down to the bare minimum, because we all want a sustainable planet, right? But how can we start working together? How can we share our knowledge? How can we show others that we can contribute this while you can contribute that? How can we start to work together? How can we form teams across the different disciplines? How can we get policymakers to move money to help support these types of objectives? It all comes down to communication. As much as you don't want to hear it, I know communication is hard, but how do you communicate with the public? How do you communicate with your colleagues? How do you sell yourself and your skill set in order to work towards these mighty goals? How do you communicate with policymakers? How do you communicate and inspire the next generation to have hope for the future? It's through communication. And with One Health Lessons, we go into communities and we communicate about the importance of that collaboration. So that way, if you want to be an engineer, if you want to be a nurse, if you want to be a sociologist, you can all work together in order to protect communities. That's the point of One Health Lessons. And that's also why I wrote the book, The Art of Science Communication, because that's how we can get our message across and move the masses in order to protect this beautiful planet we live on. Thanks again, Christopher.
Indeed, and thank you all, ladies, leaders, for joining us with us today. Audience, I understand that this conversation isn't the AI GPT talk that we're so heavily engaged in, but you know what? I tend to think that this discussion supersedes all of it. Without a planet, we have no technology to enjoy and to innovate. Thank you all for sharing this time with us. We do value you. Our Gather was well. Audience, next up, we have Athena Demos, who comes to us from a very special place of technology and technical innovation, along with Lynn Jital, who's coming to us from the beautiful continent of Africa. May our Gather be well.